Hey there, welcome to Data Humans, the podcast where I ask everyday data people what a career in data looks like for them. I'm your host, Libby. I hope you'll come with me on my journey as I learn how to podcast and as I learn what data looks like for as many different people as I can meet. Let's dive in. Hey Sloan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Libby, it's so good to see you.
This is Sloan Wheeldon, a data scientist. Today you'll hear us talk about what data science looks like for Sloan, our differing experiences with data degree programs, some tea on data science interviews, including why we like live coding interviews way more than take-home projects, and more. Well, so I would love to jump right in and have you tell people how you got into data science.
Sure. So it started for me in an AP statistics class, and I can laugh a little bit about that because I've been listening to your podcast, and it seems like a very common story.
Yep, it's my story too. This is a trend. You're like,
Yes.
Oh my gosh, statistics is so good.
Mm-hmm. And prior to taking this class, I didn't think I liked math. I didn't think I was good at math. And it was very eye-opening for me to take this class and be like, whoa, this is actually really fun. I really like this. And it was junior year of high school, which is around the time that you start thinking about, what college am I going to go to? What am I going to major in? What do I want to do with the rest of my life? Which is how it feels when you're 17.
Yes,
obviously,
it absolutely
it's not really,
does. You're like, how am I
Yes.
supposed to make this decision?
Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was very involved in music as well. So I was taking... Oh, I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that
That's
about you
awesome.
either. Oh, how exciting. Well, we got to talk about this later.
Yes, we do. But I was taking private lessons with a professor at a local college, and I knew whatever college I picked, I wanted them to have a really good music program and a professor that I wanted to take lessons with. But I also knew I wanted to major in something practical. And so I was trying to pick something that would let me do both. And I ended up landing on Drake University, which is a local private school, and I was very involved with the music program there. And they didn't have a statistics major. That's kind of what I was looking for because that's what I knew I liked. But they did have this data analytics thing. And this was in 2016, and the data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century article came out in 2012. So it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah. So this was a bachelor's program that was actually analytics. Wow. I feel like that's rare.
It was the first bachelor's program in data science in Iowa, or in data analytics in Iowa. And the program maybe was only 2 or 3 years old when I started. But I'd never programmed before. I'd never coded a single thing in my entire life. And so I was like, I don't know. I like statistics, but programming, I don't know about that. But my dad, my older brother, and my boyfriend at the time, now fiance, were all either in IT or computer science or going into it. And they were all like, you should try it. You might like it. And so I was like, okay, all these people I trust are telling me to try it. So I guess I will. And I took my first, intro to computer science class in Python. And I was like, oh, I kind of like this. This is fun. And the rest is kind of history from there. I stuck with the degree through all 4 years. I also have a music degree, so I stuck with both.
Oh my gosh, did you double major?
Yes, I was very busy.
Goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you do it in 4 years?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, did you sleep?
No, I had multiple jobs too. I look back at that time and I really question how I did it, honestly, but I did.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Congratulations. What was your music major?
It was in percussion performance.
Wow. That's amazing.
What's kind of funny is that a lot of people that were percussionists with me were actually double majors in computer science.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of overlap. And I think there is something there in that, especially percussion is very mathematical in ways I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand. And analytics is also so much art. And so I feel like there's got to be some kind of overlap in brains.
There has to be. Yeah, no, there has to be. And I meet people all the time who I bond with over music and who are also analytics people, data science people. There's got to be something there. We have a lot of musicians, DJs, sound mixers. We have a lot of those in our midst. And music theory is extremely mathematical. Mm-hmm. It's like a one of those things that can smack you in the face if you don't realize it. You're like, oh my gosh, there's so many numbers. There's so much counting in music and translation. And you are reading a different language, which is kind of like programming, where it's like, this is a translation of another language, basically, into something completely abstract, because music is very abstract, right? And so is computer science in a lot of ways. Everything in computer science is abstracted away, which was the barrier for me when I first started, because I was 33, I think, when I took my first programming class, which was R. And I thought this was so abstract that I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was like, I'm used to spreadsheets. You're telling me I have to just like imagine where these things are falling on a spreadsheet? That was really difficult for me. But I think music is really similar. It's an abstract construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really interesting. And I know now you're in a master's program too. So you are back to like doing a master's program and working. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's a lot harder than I expected, actually, talking like balancing wise, which surprised me because, as we just talked about, I was very busy in undergrad. So I thought like, oh, working full time, part-time grad school, this is going to be easy. And it's totally different, when you have a house and, school isn't your top priority. Like your job really is, which is kind of the opposite of what it is when you're in undergrad. But it's been good. I am ready to be done for sure. I'm sure most people in master's programs say that, but I've learned a lot. And my undergrad was like very technical. It was very statistics, computer science, machine learning heavy. I didn't take a single business class. And then I got into the working world and I thought, man, I actually wish I would have taken a business class, which surprised me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so my master's program is like a good mix of, still pretty technical, but I've been able to take business classes that are really filling in that gap that I realized that I had, which has been a good experience.
Oh, that's interesting. That contrasts with mine a little bit. One similarity is my undergrad was also much more technical than my master's. So I got into my master's program and I was like, oh, wow, this is way less technical than I was used to. I was used to going much more deep in undergrad. Undergrad is where I learned R and SAS programming and SPSS syntax, as cringy as a lot of people listening will think that is. And then I got into my master's program and everything was much more high level, much more like, we're going to skip a bunch of steps and give everybody a really broad overview of everything. And I was thinking my master's program was going to be a deep dive, but I was wrong. I was wrong. My undergrad was absolutely a deep dive into the like applications of statistics, and there was a lot more rigor in my undergrad. But both of my degrees were in our College of Business. So my undergrad is in management science, which is also called decision science. And so that's making business decisions with math and science and programming. So all of our classes were business focused and business use cases. Even my calculus class was business calculus. So all of our calculus problems were like business problems that were made into calculus problems. It was very interesting. And then when I got into my master's program, still in the College of Business, I had fewer business applications that I was looking at. It was kind of flip-flop for me. That's interesting. I love hearing about this. So I was at University of Texas at San Antonio, and you are at Georgia Tech?
Yes.
Okay, good. I got that right. I think Georgia Tech is pretty, they're like up and coming for their data science master's program right now. A lot of people are talking about it. It's like affordable and flexible and you have options. Like I didn't have options. I had to take all the classes, the same classes as everybody else. Do you have like a track that you got to pick?
Yeah. So there are 3 tracks you can choose from. There's an analytics track, a computation track, and a business track. And it's really only a difference of 2 classes. So I know when I started, and a lot of people do this, where they start and then they sit there and are very stressed about choosing a track, but it's 2 classes. So it doesn't need to be stressful. And I chose the business track because that's kind of the background that I'm missing. And then you can actually keep taking courses after you graduate too. And so there are other courses that look really interesting.
Wow.
And so you still have to pay for them,
Yeah.
but you can still take them. And it's a very cheap program. So it's not like it would be like a horrible thing to continue paying for it, I suppose. So I definitely have that in the back of my mind that if there's more like computation heavy classes, I still am interested in, I can take those at any time pretty much.
That's kind of amazing. I wish that I had done a little bit of research into that because I think your program is less than half the cost of mine. And it's flexible in the fact that I feel like I remember you telling me you could stop for a while. You could stop for a certain amount of time and come back and you wouldn't have to reapply.
Yeah, you just have to finish the program within 6 years. So as long as you do that, you're pretty much good. And I think it's 1 or 2 semesters you can take off without having to reapply.
Without a penalty. Yeah, that's cool.
Yes.
I did mine in a year. I would not recommend that to anybody. But I also wasn't working. So it was very, very stressful. And I was taking 4 or 5 classes at a time, depending on the time in the semester. Because some classes like started halfway through the semester. But that did mean that like I might start the semester with 4 classes and end up with 5. So as everything ramps up, like then you get an extra class and more homework and more lectures and stuff. And that can be rough. I would almost rather have that 5th class in the beginning of my semester.
Yeah.
I hope that this is enlightening for anybody out there who's listening, who is curious about data science programs and curious about, and mine actually is a data analytics program, but I feel like I would argue that it was a bit more data science focused, especially for me because I took an independent study in NLP. But if you have questions, go out there and ask a bunch of people who have been in these programs what it's like and what their experience is before you dive into one, because there's way more options now. Your bachelor's program that was in analytics was brand new. My data analytics program was pretty new. I think I started it in 2020, and it had only started, I think, with the first graduating class in 2017. So it was just a handful of years old. And right after I graduated undergrad with my management science degree, they actually added a data analytics bachelor's program for people who, were just starting their 4-year degree kind of as I was finishing mine. They now have the option to do data analytics as a bachelor's program. So many more options out there. I would say with the caveat of they are new. Like they're going to be changing. The thing that the last cohort of graduates experienced might not be what you experienced because things might be changing. Professors are going to be cycling in and out. Classes might be changing. So ask all those questions. And speaking of questions, I have another one for you that I feel like I ask everybody, and it's so interesting. What do you do every day that is different than people think that you do? Because there are so many assumptions about data science and about data analytics, not just from people like our parents or our spouses or our friends, but also from other people in data analytics. Like they think everybody else is doing something that they're not doing. So what has your everyday looked like for you for the past few years?
So I think this is getting better in the data space, like really understanding what people do day to day. But the article on data science being the sexiest job of the 21st century didn't help things starting out. And so I think when I think about what other people think about data science, I think a lot of people are thinking that you're doing all of these like sexy, cool modeling, artificial intelligence, predicting, understanding the future and that kind of thing. And I do spend a good chunk of my days modeling and doing machine learning and that kind of thing, depending on where I'm at on a project. But a lot of my time is spent in meetings. If we're in the corporate world, can't get away from that. And trying to understand what the problem is, trying to understand which problems are even worth doing, like what's the business impact, trying to understand the business, especially I just started at my company 4 or 5 months ago. So, just trying to understand what's going on and what the business strategy is and that kind of thing. Trying to connect disparate data sources, cleaning data, huge chunk, and waiting on data. I've never worked a job where that isn't an aspect.
Waiting for a data source to be hydrated with data is so much more of a job than you think it's going to be.
So, I would say that's kind of, I really like it. I wouldn't say that it's a sexy job.
No, it's not as sexy as we were sold.
Yes.
And we forgot to talk about this, but this is something I know about you. You got hired right out of your bachelor's program through, I think, a university job fair, right?
Yes.
How did that work? They work. So go to university job fairs. Yeah. Well, they don't work for everybody. I guess I've been to several that have been busts, but
Yeah.
You know what? You don't know unless you do go.
Mm-hmm.
You can't win unless you play.
So not only was it a career fair, but it was also in 2020. So it was stressful. So I went to the career fair in early February, and I spoke to the company that I ended up working for, and I asked them if they had an analytics team, and they said no, and tried to get me to join sales. And so I walked away from that conversation. I was like, okay, writing them off, I won't even like look them up, which that was a good lesson for me, because I got a call the next day and it was, hey, can we interview you? We have a position open. And I said, you have an analytics team? You have data science at all? And they said, yeah, we do. And so don't take what the people at career fairs say.
Wait, this was the same company?
Yes.
So the people recruiting at the career fair just maybe weren't fully informed. Okay.
Yeah. Which that can totally happen. Companies are huge.
Yeah.
And so then I ended up, going through the whole interview process, and I accepted the job probably early March 2020. And they wanted me to start spring break
in
2020.
Office.
And yeah, I was supposed to be in the office. And I was going to work spring break, finish out my senior year of college, work part-time, and kind of work part-time, still do school, and then start like full-time in May. And so I started working in March 2020, part-time, completely from home, first full-time job ever, working from my childhood bedroom that's painted pink, like all of the, and I mean, everyone was going through, going through some times in March 2020, but yeah, that was my experience. I felt very, very lucky to have accepted a job early enough and that they kept me on.
Before the shutdown happened.
So grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because that was right when a lot of people were losing their livelihoods, and people who had in-person jobs were kind of stressing out about whether they were going to have anything in the future. That was a really stressful time for me too. I feel like 2020, the spring of 2020, I was about to graduate with my bachelor's degree, and I was in my 30s, and I was like, what does this mean? What does this mean for me graduating in May, being able to find a job, being able to find an internship? Like, who's gonna prioritize a 35-year-old intern? It was very, very strange. I feel like you did get so lucky that you met them in February, like right before everything happened.
And I debated at the time, thinking like, is this the right company? I have so much time before May. I can keep looking. And it was, my family said, just accept it. Like, you can always keep looking in the future if it's not a good fit. Just accept it and see what happens and see if you like it. And I was so thankful that I did. And yeah, it was a crazy time for all of us, but it worked out.
And here you are 3 years later, and you've just started a new company, you said. Do you feel like onboarding during the pandemic, onboarding remotely, I guess I should say, and during the pandemic, because that's an extra layer of stress, was that more difficult? Like having to work with this company who is suddenly all having to be remote, and how did relationship building work? Did all of that work out okay?
It was really hard. And I think that now it wouldn't be as hard if it happened again, because everyone's used to working remotely, but the company wasn't used to that. And so everyone was trying to learn like what working remotely was like, as I was trying to do the same thing and also get onboarded. So there just wasn't a process ready that was built and ready for someone to onboard remotely in that way. And it was really, really hard. And my current role is a hybrid role, actually. So I'm in person a few days a week. And I have found that going from a job that was pretty much remote to working in person at this time in my life at this company with this team, I really, really like the balance. And it helped me personally. I don't think this is the case for everyone. And I don't even know that it'll be the case for me in 5-10 years. But I've found that it's a lot easier to get to know people and like feel like you're part of a team.
Yeah.
Having that in-person experience. But that's just me. And I also enjoyed a lot of aspects of working fully remotely when I was doing that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person and the people you're working with. Because like sometimes I've worked in person for a long time. I started working remotely in 2015, but I had a whole, decade of working before that. And being in person is so different in a technical sense. Like you can lean over to the person next to you and say like, what do I click for this? Like when you're in your first week and you don't exactly know where everything is, it's so much less intimidating to just tap someone on the shoulder or pull somebody aside and say, hey, can you help me walk through this? Than it is to feel like you're interrupting somebody's very tight schedule that you can see on their calendar for a Zoom call so that they can walk you through something. Those things to me felt very different. And I really missed the sort of environment of just like being able to be onboarded in person. So different. But you're right. There's merits either way. And I have worked with companies that are fully remote that they really have it down. Like they have onboarding down. They have all of the, introduction into the communities down. And it really depends. I think that's going to become a differentiator in the future for all of these companies that are embracing remote work. People who can onboard well while working remotely and really bring people in and make them feel supported are going to retain people past that 6-month mark so much more easily. And right now it kind of feels like everybody's looking for a data science job. Everybody is out there job hunting, and we've had so many layoffs, unfortunately, in the past 6 months that it feels like the market's just getting fuller and fuller, or more full of people who are searching for the same type of job. And you, obviously, I think you've gone through the interview experience a few times now. What are some things that you feel like could be done better in the data science hiring process?
So the big thing that I know we're going to get into, so I will spare you talking about it too much, is take-home projects. So I'll pause that topic for a moment.
Oh, man.
And beyond that, that's the huge thing for me. Beyond that, I think the titles are so confusing. Even when you were talking about your program and you were mentioning, well, it was I think you said it was an analytics program, but it was really more data science. Both of my degrees are analytics. I'm doing the quotations with my hands for the podcast, but analytics, but we're so technical. And, when you're job hunting, you'll see titles that say data analyst, but you need to know Python and R and know machine learning. Or you'll see a job that says data scientist and it's all reporting. Or you'll see a decision scientist, you'll see data analytics specialist, data engineer. Like there's so many. And the title doesn't really tell you anything about the job. Yeah. And so you have to read through the whole description, which is exhausting.
And sometimes not even right. Like sometimes the job description is made by somebody in recruiting or HR, and it doesn't really reflect what the department even needs.
And then you have to interview and ask about it and try to suss out, like, what is this actual job? And that's very frustrating. But I think what came out of that for me was just to not care about the title at all. Yeah. That I know what I want to do with my day-to-day, and that's what I perceive to be data science, like things that involve statistics and modeling and programming, and whatever that title that I have, who cares? I'm looking to see, like, am I going to be doing the things that I want to do on the day-to-day? But it took me a while to get to that point and to really not care about the title at all when I was looking.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually, this might be a controversial opinion of mine, but I think that when you leave a job and you're looking at your resume and your LinkedIn profile, and if you have a job title from your previous job that does not match what you did, add some notes or change your job title to make it match what you actually did. Like if you were a reporting analyst, in reality, you weren't really a data scientist, or you weren't really a data analyst in your mind, whatever you define that as, I think it's okay to do that. I've done that a little bit. Like I've worked jobs where my job title doesn't even really spark recognition for other people. They're like, what is that? What would that person do? Like, oh, well, in actuality, I was really a Shiny developer, an R developer, whatever it was. Those are the things that make sense to other people. So at least in your your LinkedIn profile or something, you can change things to be what you actually did. And I think that as we keep going as an industry, we're going to get closer to defining roles and some things that are kind of, problems that I think are pretty well known at this point. Like, hey, don't hire a data scientist if what you actually need is a data engineer. All of that stuff's going to get more well defined. At least I hope so. My fingers are crossed for all of us, because if not, we're all going to just lose our minds. No one's going to be able to find a job or employ anybody who does what they need them to do. And yeah, oh gosh. Okay. So let's dig into coding interviews versus take home projects, because I know that you and I agree with each other. We would rather have a live coding interview than a take home project. But I do know that there are a lot of people who feel the opposite from that, and they think that we're crazy. So let's talk about it a little bit. Why do we hate take home projects, and why do we think live coding is great?
So the thing about take-home projects and the difference between the two is that when you do a coding assessment, that's something that you might get one question in one company's assessment, and maybe you don't do that great on it the first time. And then you go practice, and then you might see that same exact question in a future coding interview. And so it's something that as you continue to get better at it, it's beneficial and useful and makes the interview process easier. And take less time is a huge aspect. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a coding interview expert, but when I was interviewing last summer, it was something that I saw myself get better at, and I saw it be beneficial in my interview process. Whereas a take-home project, yeah, you're getting experience, but it's this one-off tiny little project that's very specific to the company. Maybe you can put it in your portfolio if that's something that you need or want, or the company even lets you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much it. They take so much more time, in my opinion, as well.
They do. And there's always, every time I've been given a take home something, someone in the process says, this should only take you X amount of time. It'll be like, this should only take you 30 minutes, or this should only take you 2 hours. It always takes me longer. And then that feeds my self-doubt. I'm like, oh no, if this is taking me longer than they think, then maybe I'm not good enough. When in reality, we are all so different. We are all completely different in the way that we work through things, the amount of time that we spend on certain things. And I mean, I feel like there's just no way to compare that in a valuable way when all you're getting is the end product. You know, It's like you're not having someone come to you and tell you, well, I took 8 hours on this, even though you said it should be 2, and here's why. You're just getting the end product and maybe like a demonstration. And for me, the stress that comes from that, and then having to present it to somebody in a 30-minute meeting at the end of the whole thing, I'm like, I just spent what amounts to several days of anxiety and several days of mental and emotional energy on this thing that could potentially go absolutely nowhere, and I'm not being paid for it. And for people who have a full-time job and are trying to look for a job, what time do you expect them to be scraping from their life for this? Like, especially if they've got kids and other responsibilities. Like, I think it's absolutely crazy, and I don't like it. But I've also talked to hiring managers who are like, it's the only way for me to determine if they're a good fit, you know, for my organization. I guess it depends, you know, that there's a lid for every pot, right? So like the people who love those take-home tests, maybe those are the people who are best for those types of roles. I don't know. But I agree with you that having a live coding interview, it's over. Like once it's over, it's done. Like you're there for half an hour or 45 minutes or whatever. And it's all you. It's not ChatGPT either, which is something that people haven't even been really talking about lately. But how do you trust that someone's take-home project isn't just ChatGPT now? Because it could be. You wouldn't know. If you have somebody live coding in front of you, you can also talk with them, find out what it's like to pair code with them. And that goes both ways. Like if I'm pair coding with somebody on the other end who's going to end up being my senior or my manager, and they're really fun to work with, that gives me the ability as a candidate to assess them and say, oh, is this somebody that I want to work with? How do they deal with my failures? How do they deal with me not knowing something? How comfortable are they with admitting that they're wrong about something or that they need to Google something? All of that stuff is so helpful for me as a candidate. Except for I will say, if you're in the position of doing a take-home test, or not a take-home test, like a live coding test, and you can tell the person who's on the other end wouldn't be the person that you're working with, that's less helpful for me.
Definitely.
Like it's somebody in some other department who's stepping in to do this. Like I'd rather have the person that I would be working with or who would be over me. But have you... This is a nosy question, but I have done this. Have you declined to continue with an interview process because they gave you a take-home exam?
actually my current role, I didn't decline to interview. My now manager, at this point, I had been through quite a few interviews with this company. I felt so good about it. I felt like they liked me and they offered me the job, so they must have.
Yeah.
But my manager had asked me if I would do a take home. And at this point, I had had multiple personal experiences. I'll call them horror stories for a little bit of drama. And I can talk about those too, but reasons that I didn't want to do take homes again. And he told me that it was going to take a certain amount of time. And I said, I'm going to spend way more time on that. Like, I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm going to spend way more on that. I'm in grad school. Can I just not do it? And I said it more eloquently than that. I was so nervous about asking about it, actually, because that is so scary.
Did you offer up anything in like return? Like, here's my portfolio. Let me talk about a project I did. No,
I don't have a portfolio.
Neither do I.
But I have an undergrad degree. I had 2.5 years of experience at the time, and I was halfway through a master's program, and I just knew mentally where I was at that moment. There was nothing left for me to offer, I guess, in terms of, I think another thing you can offer is like, I will talk through the project with you, what I might do, but just not spend a lot of time on it. But I asked and I said, here's where I'm at. Here's my, I think my reasoning that I really used was just grad school at the time. I'm going to spend way more on it than what you suggested. And he said something like, we want to hire the people that are going to spend more time on it. Like and so I understand where you're coming from. And he said it was okay. And then I was very nervous because is it really okay? And you wait, and I got an offer and it worked out for me, but it was very scary to say no to the project, or very gently ask, I suppose. I didn't say no. Very gently ask if it's okay.
Cordially decline. I think that's a really fantastic bit of advice for people, especially, I'm going to say, women who are in their 20s and 30s who have not yet kind of built up the type of self-confidence that we wish that we did. That sometimes the advice, or sometimes the right course of action is standing your ground a little bit and maintaining this barrier, this boundary, I should say, not barrier, the boundary around your time and your effort and stuff, and be willing to walk away from something that is really going to push that boundary. And I have said no. I've gotten through an interview process and said, like, I don't think this is right for me, or thank you so much for your time. It was great interviewing with you, but I'm not really interested in doing a take-home problem. There are some other things that I have offered, I guess, as something different. And you're right, walking through something that is much more my comfort level. Like, let me tell you about my thought process. Because when you do a take-home problem, unless you are there presenting it and able to really, really recreate your thought process, I feel like it's not the same. Like when you're live and you're saying, okay, I'm seeing this problem for the first time, here are my first thoughts, then those people know that that's really how your brain is working. It's not like you went home and Googled, how do I solve this type of business problem? It's all you. It's all like your raw instinct. And I think that that's really important and powerful. Not that Googling things is not okay. I Google things all day long, as we all do. But yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I can only imagine how absolutely nervous you were waiting, just like, oh no, what have I done? I think this is the way that most people feel when they've asked for more money in a negotiation too. They're like, they're like, oh, have I made a mistake?
Yes.
Have I made a mistake asking for, $5,000 more, 10K more, whatever. But you're worth it. You're worth, respecting your value and your worth and your boundaries. But I do want the juicy details on your horror stories, because I think a lot of us can relate, probably, listening.
Yeah, so I have 3, and they're all different. And this was the first time that I was asked to do a take-home project, and it was with a company that I was really, really interested in. I had already done 2 recruiter interviews with them. I'd interviewed with a manager, and I did a verbal technical interview with 2 of my coworkers. And I also think that the verbal technical interview on data science topics is another really great way to understand, like, assess a candidate. And I think those are really fun, actually. Those are my favorite.
I light up inside. I'm like, oh my gosh, you want me to talk about statistics and modeling? My favorite.
And they're fun to study for too. Like it just, I don't know. I liked doing those quite a bit. And so the last thing that they wanted me to do was a take-home project, and it was on natural language processing. And they gave me a week, which I appreciated because I knew I was going to spend a lot of time on it that week. And they sent it to me on a Friday, and I spent the whole weekend kind of refreshing myself on natural language processing. I was reading textbooks, mapping out my plan for actually doing the project. It was just like a classification problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I didn't spend an exorbitant amount of time on it, but a good chunk of time at that point. I was planning on like really cracking down throughout the week. And then on Monday, I got an email that they were no longer hiring for the position.
Oh, no.
And so I was very thankful that they told me as quickly as possible, and it wasn't, you know, after I had turned it in. But that is incredibly frustrating as a
You
candidate.
lost a whole weekend.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
all the other interviews that I did, and of course, I mean, I could have done the project and they could have not offered me the job, which is also frustrating. But like to not even be given the opportunity and to just have it completely taken away. And this was like summer 2022. This was like right when kind of the economy was not looking great in particular.
Yeah.
It was right at the start of that. And so then it felt like, oh no, is this going to be every take-home project? Like then you're worried about what that looks like. So that was my first bad experience, I would say. And my second one was actually with a startup, and I didn't do this one. And I had done I think only 2 interviews with them at this point, maybe 3. And they sent me the take-home project. They asked me if I'd be willing to do one, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll give it a try. I wasn't completely jaded
at that
from
point.
the process yet. Yeah. And they sent me the project, and it was the entire idea of their startup. Like it was the whole startup. And
What?
the startup, yes.
Like solve our business problem for us?
Yes.
Interesting.
And the startup was on like predicting something around like housing prices and like rentals and things like that. And they had all the data, and they wanted me to access their real data and their real databases and send me all of their code and all it. Yeah, it left a bad taste in my mouth, because the other thing about take homes is, are you doing free work for them? Like, what
and
is
how
the
do you
startup
know?
gonna? You don't.
Yeah, you
And
don't.
Is the startup gonna just take my project and for free implement it and I like say no to me, not hire me for the job, and I'll never even know? I don't know. And so I ended up, it was a combination of, I wasn't really sure it was the right time in my life to work with a startup anyway, and I didn't really like what they were asking from the take home, and so I told them no. And I actually got an email back that was like, "You were our top candidate, we're so sad, please tell us why." And I think I just leaned on that. I don't know that it's the right time to work at a startup, but it was a combination of that, but also I didn't like what they were asking me to do for the take home.
Yeah, I can imagine that feeling pretty weird.
Yeah, and I think that's a common worry, is that like, are they going to take this and use this even if they don't hire me?
Or instead of hiring you?
Yes.
Like, oh, we don't need you anymore. We have all of your ideas.
Yes. But the last experience was the one that like really made me say, I think I said after it happened, I will never do a take-home project again, which I think, depending on where I am in life, if I wasn't in grad school, maybe if it was a company I really liked, maybe I would consider doing one. But at the time after this, it was, I'm never doing one again.
Yeah. Oh, wait. In grad school and working a full-time job. Like you...
All in data science.
Yeah.
Like,
You
I'm doing the
not
same thing
have time.
all day long.
Right.
And you're asking me to do more. And I'm like, you know, practicing for interviews. I'm studying. I'm researching companies. Like, I don't have time for a take home.
Yeah.
And so this company, they gave me just the weekend to work on the project. And they sent it to me on like Friday evening. And so the problem with the weekend is that you can't ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they don't lay out like essentially a rubric on what exactly they're looking for and more information, you're probably going to have questions. I feel like one of the big things in this space is asking a million questions.
Yeah,
for
it's the
clarification.
job. Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you ask the right questions to figure out what people need?
Exactly. And when you're given a project on the weekend, that's completely stripped away, which is such a huge part of the job. And the question was something like on whether it was more of an ethical question. It was whether libraries should continue doing fines. So I thought I read the question. I thought that was kind of a weird question, but I was interested. I love libraries. And they, and the data that they sent was super strange. It was grouped really weirdly, and it was only on checkout data, and nothing was granular, and there was no data on fines at all. There was no amount that people were paying in fines, because then you could look at like, oh, are people paying fines and then they like never check out again, or like, you know,
Right.
what's happening in libraries with fines and their checkout rates, or like, you know, demographics. Are there certain demographics that this is a big issue with? There was nothing. And so I looked at it and I, you know, really quick, how am I supposed to do this? I did a ton of research to try and find outside data that existed to pull that in. Couldn't find any. Actually found multiple articles talking about the issues of lack of data for the specific problem.
No.
And so I was very frustrated that I didn't feel like it was a project I could show off my skills with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up just doing like more of an exploratory data analysis, because you sit there and you wonder, like, what is this company really looking for? And I'm thinking, well, they're asking this weird question. They didn't give me great data. I only have 48 hours on a weekend. Maybe they're just looking to see, you know, can she like work with data at all and talk about it?
Yeah. And work with ambiguity. I feel like that's part of it, right?
Yes. And so I was like, maybe that's what they're looking for. So I did the best that I could. I put together a presentation. You know, I was going to talk about all of the different like machine learning things that I would do if I had better data. I had all these plans and all these things I was going to talk about. But when you send when you create a PowerPoint, you don't put everything on the PowerPoint. You leave a lot that you're just going to express later. You know, I had them in my notes, but I didn't send them. So I send the project off on like Sunday evening, and I get a voicemail the next day. Not a call. Like I didn't pick up. And she didn't say like, hey, call me back. It was just a voicemail. And it said, hi, we saw your presentation come in. It wasn't at the level we expected, so we don't want to continue. They didn't even give me the opportunity to present, to talk about, you know, the issues with the data, my perspective on what they were asking, all the things I wanted to do, nothing. It was just, we didn't like your presentation, bye. And that's when I was like, I'm never doing this again.
Another weekend gone. How frustrating. I wish that people could respect the fact that like, we're already working a lot. We're already spending so much time on all of this. And when you show from the very beginning in the interview process that you don't respect our time over the weekend, then how can we expect that you're going to respect it when we work at your organization? That's insane to me. But it does show just how kind of fraught with peril it is when you're looking for a job, because you might be working in an organization, or you might end up working in an organization that operates like that on a daily basis, that doesn't have a lot of direction, that doesn't have the data that they need. And like, that's a real life scenario, the ambiguity of people not really knowing what they want. Or even the flip side, my least favorite type of data science or data analytics take-home project is, here's the data, tell us your insights. No direction on what they want to know. To me, that tells me that you're the type of organization that treats data like a treasure hunt, not as a tool, not as something that you can leverage to solve the business problems that you already know exist, but as some sort of strange, like, you know, scavenger data hunt where you are just giving people data and asking them to provide value from it without really knowing what you want and what would help you as an organization. And then kind of putting that on data scientists to figure out, when the data scientists are the technical people. They're not always the core business people. There has to be a marriage of those two things. And I think that organizations that don't have that direction already in place and are not already treating data as a tool really freak me out a little bit, because I don't want to be in that position where I'm the person constantly trying to prove my value by just doing a treasure hunt and just giving you insights on data that you might not care about. And maybe this is why so many data science projects fail. And that's something people don't talk about a lot, is just how many data analytics, data science, data engineering projects don't come to fruition, and a bunch of time and energy gets pumped into them, and then nothing happens, or they get completed and then no one uses the thing. Nobody uses the product. Do you have any experience with that you'd like to share?
Yes. So my first experience with this happened at my last job. And what happened was they had assigned me to be on what they called a hackathon, which was essentially where a team of people drops absolutely everything. You drop all of your meetings, all of your other projects, and the estimated timeline they gave was 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, you sit in a Teams call for 8 hours with these people, and maybe they break you off into sessions. It was actually really fun.
Sometimes that's energizing, and sometimes that's really draining.
It was draining at times, but it's kind of nice to drop I don't know. I like to think that like variety is the spice of life, and it definitely added variety. And so that was the project. And for simplicity's sake, I'm simplifying the project quite a bit. But essentially, they wanted to have a prediction on when a product was going to show up. So like when you order something from Amazon, it'll be like your estimated delivery date is April 18th. Essentially that is very simplified, but that it's good enough for the conversation. And so we were told, I was the only data scientist and really the only analytics data person at all involved on this. And we were told, the business wants this thing. We don't have time to ask questions. Just go. And so we're back to that questions thing.
Yeah. The inability to clarify.
Yes. And so I took that for what it was. We were told multiple times, we don't have time to ask any questions. Just do this thing, go. And so that's what I did. And I was using, past data as we do to try to predict future deliveries. And I had the context at least that I knew that the business was really hoping that it would be a very short time frame for a prediction. I at least knew that going in, which is something I would definitely ask about if I had not known. And so I go in to present it, and my data was really showing that the time frame was much, much longer than what they were looking at. Like depending on the product, it was maybe like 6 weeks to 3 months. Like it was quite a bit of time.
Right.
And I presented on that, and the response I got was, well, this is really great. Like you're using the past data. That's awesome. But we're going to change so much in the manufacturing process right now that all the past data is completely irrelevant. So we're just going to stick with 2 weeks because that's what we feel like it's going to be.
They didn't tell you any of this stuff?
No. And I mean, I knew that some changes were happening, but I was told to do this prediction and not ask any questions, because if I had been able to ask more questions on like, what are you changing? I could have layered in an aspect of like, here's my prediction, based on past data. Here's my prediction, layering in the potential manufacturing changes. I would have tried to understand that aspect more to make it a little bit more palatable, but I couldn't do that. And so it ended up being 4 weeks, not 2 weeks. And it was just 4 weeks of working on this project, working way more than 40 hours a week, like heads down, trying to figure this out. It was actually extremely fun. Like I really can't talk bad about it. I don't know, like it sounds worse than it is.
Frustrating. It's just a lesson for organizations in the value of clarification, and that is so much of a data scientist and a data analyst job. Like, yes, for sure, giving you a picture that maybe you weren't looking for is part of it. Having the ability to decipher what is happening and present insights, that's absolutely part of the job. But if you don't let people clarify things and ask hard questions, you are not going to get the value out of your data people, because the ability for them to ask, what do you want? Why do you want it? And what decision are you going to make with it? That's really, really valuable for you as an organization to clarify what you need and not waste a bunch of time doing things for the wrong reason. Or, gathering data and creating dashboards on things that just don't matter to you in the long run. Or take more resources than they really need to take because you're focusing on the wrong thing. How frustrating. But also, I get that it's kind of exciting to step away from what you're doing and just like put all your effort on something fun for a little while. It gives you a little break, right?
And it was my first like failed implementation. And I think when that happened, it was not quite when I was looking for a new job, but that's a very common interview question, is like, tell me about a project that failed. And so even though it was frustrating, it was like, sweet, I have this in my back pocket now. I can talk about this.
Now you have an interview question. That's hilarious.
And the hardest thing for me is that I already knew to ask questions. The only reason I didn't was because we were specifically told not to, but it was a good lesson for me that next time if someone says, I need you to work on this, you can't ask questions, I won't. It'll be, no, I'm going to ask questions or I'm not working on it.
Right.
Honestly. And I think you have to put your foot down. If I feel like that's hopefully that situation doesn't happen to anyone else, but if it did, I implore you to push back for sure. I definitely will in the future if it happens to me.
Even if you're the new person, and especially if you're the new person, because then you need more context than someone who's been there a while. It can feel really daunting to be the new person or to be the junior person on a team. And to know that like, oh, I need to ask this stakeholder this question. And maybe it's not you that needs to do it. Maybe it's the data interpreter or data communicator on your team who is probably a senior member. But whoever it is, make sure that you go to those people and you get those questions answered so that you don't spin your wheels for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks on something that is not even what anybody wants to know. How frustrating. Yeah, I think about this a lot because LinkedIn, I feel like, is one big showcase of people talking about stuff that they've done, accomplishments that they've had, projects that they've worked on that were so good and celebrating them. And while I think it's wonderful that we celebrate the good stuff, there aren't a lot of people celebrating the failures and what they learned from them. And there's so many people in data science on LinkedIn who get a lot of eyes on them, who are pretty gatekeepy with their posts and their language and stuff. What do you think about LinkedIn? Actually, that's a good question. Like, do you spend much time there and do you give any credence to this stuff? And has it ever made you feel bad?
Oh, definitely. To your last point, at least.
I think it's all made us feel bad at one point or another.
I had a moment of, very early on into my data science career where, am I a real data scientist? That's a question that I see talked about a lot. And I got very like imposter syndrome. Like, am I really a data scientist? And I started doing research. And you get to LinkedIn and there's so many people that are like, oh, you're not a real data scientist unless you're an expert in TensorFlow. You're not a real data scientist unless you've put 10 models into production. And it's really easy to see that and feel really bad and feel like, I'm not a real data scientist or I'm not a real whatever. And so I stay far away from that aspect of LinkedIn. I ended up doing a lot of research on my own and like reading non-LinkedIn articles and things like that to come up with my perspective on what I felt like a data scientist was. And it really was what I was doing on the day-to-day. And it definitely made me feel better. But I am on LinkedIn a decent amount. I do think there's some really great aspects about it. I love Libby's posts. I would recommend anyone follow her. I'm sure most people listening to this probably do, but
mine are all real talk.
Yes, they are. And I really appreciate that. And I feel like I do know you, but I feel like even if I didn't, like reading your posts, I feel like it's you. It's not this version of yourself that you're putting out to look good and to look like, I don't know, what most people on LinkedIn do. Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you saying that because that's one of the things that is really important to me. Transparency is really important to me and being real is really important to me. I think of it like being a good role model almost, because we all have role models that are also our peers. Your role models are not just people who are older than you, wiser than you, senior to you, whatever. I don't anymore, but I used to roller skate a lot, and I roller skated at skate parks, and I played roller derby, and I always wore all my pads and my helmet, all my gear, all the time. At the skate park, I might be the only person wearing a ton of gear and a helmet, and it's not because I fell a lot, even though I did have a few concussions, and like anybody who plays sports goes through that, and you do learn how important safety gear is. I knew that there were these young kids all around me all the time that were looking at me, that were watching me, and I needed to, make sure that I was representing that safety is cool and that like I'm an adult who wears safety gear and you should too. I think that translates to LinkedIn for me. Like if you are a data professional, part of the data community, and you are always pretending to be perfect, and you are never showing any cracks in your facade, and you're never showing any flaws, you are never expressing your hardships, your frustrations, your whatever, you're really not presenting a whole person. And I think that some people would argue that that's okay, and we don't all need to be, giving away all of our private information all the time. But I think that there's a balance there that can be found between celebrating the good and kind of sharing both sides of your life and your career and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It makes you more approachable. I mean, my advice to people in that realm is let some of those chinks in your armor show, because that makes you more relatable as a human being. But I truly hope that we can kind of move away from the gatekeepy data science stuff on LinkedIn. I mute those people. Like, as soon as I see a post from somebody like that, I click on the little 3 dots or whatever, and I mute that person, because it's never somebody that I'm following. It's always somebody that is just either being promoted or somebody else has liked their content. And another thing is that I see people post, here's a list of people in data science that you should be following. And it's all guys. There's no women on the list, or there's one woman on the list. I'm like, you guys, come on. Like, can we really? And I sort of realized after a while that there's 2 sides to that. Like, one side is these men are only following men and maybe not following any women in data science. And so they think that they don't exist. And then on the other side, and this is something you and I have talked about a little bit, women are much less likely, I think, to put themselves out there as data scientists, because then they are harassed, or they are, forced to prove themselves more than a guy is for some reason. And that can really cause people, and I know that it has caused me, to pull back and not present myself online as this overly technical person, especially like sharing code and stuff like that, because I don't want to be ripped apart. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of other women maybe feel that way. What's your take?
Yeah, I know if you all, if the people listening, look at my LinkedIn, you'll see that I don't post very much.
Yeah.
So I definitely fall in the camp of, like, I don't know if nervousness is the right word, but definitely uncomfortable with like putting myself out there online, because of a lot of reasons that you shared, that, the context has been perfection in the past, and it's scary. It's scary to put perfection out there, because that's not real. It's exhausting also to try and like make yourself look perfect, because no one is. But then putting yourself out there and showing that you're not perfect is also scary. And I don't think that you have to. Like, I don't think you need to, in that sense, like, get over the nervousness of putting yourself out there on LinkedIn. I think it's totally fine to treat it as, like, I have this for jobs and that kind of thing.
Right.
But I do think making sure that the people that you're following and the content that you're consuming is not all people trying to show themselves as perfect. And I think that's the case with all social media, and that being able to follow people that come across more genuine and show that they're real humans, I think is just better mentally.
Yeah.
In general.
It's better
so even
for
if
all
you,
of us.
yes. So even if you're not someone that wants to post on LinkedIn for any reason, make sure that the people that you're following aren't, the perfect gatekeepy type of content creators on any platform.
I agree. Ask yourself how things make you feel when you see them. How do I feel? Do I feel better? Do I feel empowered? Do I feel, valued as a human being? If the answer is no to all of those things, like, maybe mute that person, maybe unfollow that person, because there's just not enough. No, life's too short for you to be feeling that way, and all of your feelings of inadequacy are probably unrealistic. The suggestion that I would make to people who don't really want to interact or post on LinkedIn very much, which is absolutely valid, I stay away from a lot of posting on a lot of social media, is to really start connecting to other people in your industry one-on-one. Reach out, make friends, join some communities where you can go to community talks, and get some one-on-one friends. And Sloan, you are one for me that I feel like I can come to anytime and talk to. Give yourself a better, more realistic perspective on what your industry peers look like through actually talking to them and not just looking at their LinkedIn posts, because you will discover a whole variety of problems and dreams and aspirations and struggles that you didn't know existed, and you'll probably be able to identify with all of them so much more. And I really hope that that's what this podcast is doing for people, in some small way, because it's very small and I don't have very many episodes yet. But I thank you so much, Sloan, for being a part of it and for sharing all of your experiences with us. It's so valuable. Thank you for being a real human being. And I look forward to maybe having you on again someday when you have had some different experiences and you have more to share.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening, y'all. This podcast is brought to you by Libby Heron, that's me, and a whole lot of time, fear, doubt, and a little bit of laughter. Have a good one.